I would probably not use the adjective smooth.
Right. I think that's a pretty apt thing.
Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross. I'm very excited today because I have John Shaw with me, who's the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. And we're going to be talking about all things debate. The debate just aired between Harris and Trump. What a 90 minutes, like hour and 45. Crazy. John, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Emily. Thank you.
All right, before we begin, I'll be honest, I've had a cocktail already because I need it whenever I watch a debate. But what beer are we drinking?
I am drinking Bud Light, my all-time favorite. So
love. Always a classic. I have a Sky Duster beer, West Coast IPA. It's what the hotel bar had.
Sounds good.
Ooh, we're a little foamy. Cheers. Ooh, that's good. Citrusy. Tastes like California.
Okay.
All right. John, the question I always like to ask my guests is, why should we trust what you have to say? Tell us a little about yourself.
Emily, I'm from Peoria, Illinois. I'm one of those few people from the heart of the Midwest. I grew up in Peoria and Midwestern guy. Was a reporter for about 25 years in Washington, D.C., which maybe would not enhance the trust factor, but have come back to the Midwest. And I'm the director of a public policy institute on the campus of Southern Illinois University. So I'll try to be credible. I'll do my very best.
No, absolutely. And like I always say, I'm not a nonpartisan person. Very very liberal. I was like, but acknowledge it, put it out there so people can take what you have to say with a grain of salt. And that's all we're about. Just being honest and open about it. All right, John, first thoughts on this crazy debate. What do you think?
I think Harris did well. I think at core, she had to not get rattled, and she kept her poise. I think she needed to persuade Democrats that she can win. I think she did that. And I think she gave a sort of permission structure for the 10, 15, 20% of Republican voters who voted for Nikki Haley in the primaries, who are Republicans, but they're really, really not comfortable with Donald Trump. And they're not sure if they can vote for a Democrat, this one time. And I think Harris gave them a permission to say, okay, let's vote for Harris now. Even if I'm an ardent Republican, maybe I'll oppose her in 4 years. And I have to say, this has been said before, but when you watch Donald Trump for 90 minutes, just the full scope of his incoherence is, frankly, it's shocking and it's terrifying. This person would be the custodian of the nuclear code. And I wouldn't trust, just the way he comported himself, I wouldn't trust him to pick up my mail for this coming weekend when I'm going to be out of town. I would not feel comfortable that he could competently execute that, let alone, the burdens of the presidency. So I think, Trump, I thought was, when you see him, and I follow politics closely, so I know who he is. I've been watching him for certainly since 2015. But when you see this full 90 minutes, you just get a really kind of starker appreciation of just the kind of stream of consciousness ramblings and really the lack of ability to marshal a clear, coherent argument. It just does not happen. Right.
No, first of all, just to acknowledge the fact, what a difference from seeing Trump and Biden those couple months ago. It was a completely different debate. I'm personally extremely happy that Harris is now the one representing the Democratic Party. And speaking of coherency, last debate was a little bit difficult to see those differences, right? Now we have between Harris and Trump, and the coherency argument, it's night and day. And what I thought was so interesting was the first couple of minutes, Trump kept his composure. He kind of tried to really live up to the presidential name, right? Which is what he always does. But the minute he feels any type of attack, he just goes off the rails. You can tell she very specifically got under his skin by talking about the sizes of the audience of his rallies. And that just set him off. And he was gone. I
Yeah,
mean, God,
and it was wonderfully practiced. I mean, what did she say? That
yeah,
they were bored and
they
frustrated
were
or bored. Yeah,
exactly.
and again, for Trump, who prides himself in being this, incredible showman who's, compelling and magnetic. I mean, those are words to bring him to the barricade. So yeah, I think that was a couple surgical words really got him unraveled. And I mean, the one thing, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Emily. Once again, I thought the moderators fell down. I think they allowed him to just continue to just, go off script, use time that was not his, keep talking. And I just felt that they, once again, and I know it's hard to police someone like Trump because he just doesn't adhere to the rules that he agreed to. But I mean, what was your take on that?
Well, my first take was this was supposed to be a debate where the mics were cut off after the designated time. And every single time, either Kamala or Trump spoke out of turn, they turned the mics back on. So it really just allowed them to just ignore the rules of the debate and really kind of mitigated the whole effect of what the purpose of turning the mics off was supposed to do. So, I mean, I understand what they were trying to do, but then don't set up those rules if you're not going to follow it, But yeah, it's hard because Trump what he does is he just spews incoherent things. And most of the time, let's say 90% of the time, it is not true. And how do you fact check someone when their entire platform is based on non-truths that that almost half of the nation believes to be truths, right? But I agree, it is almost impossible to keep up with the level of what he is saying. And I feel like they have to pick and choose which battle they're going to take, right? And he just bulldozes. He bulldozes, and bulldozes. In all the debates I've seen, I do feel like they've done the best job out of them of trying to kind of bring it back down. And they did a lot of, that's not the question. What we're asking is, are you going to answer the question? This is the question, which I think sometimes moderators just get frustrated and they don't actually continue to do that. However, I do think there needs to be some type of agreement within the media world of how do you fact check a person who you just know is going to lie for majority of the things that they have to say.
One thing that surprised me is, and I realize that Harris is trying to do this delicate dance of both showing that she's experienced, but not absorbing some of the baggage of the Biden administration. I think she could have much more briefly, concisely defended the Biden record. I mean, it is a significant positive record on the economy, and you can acknowledge that inflation got out of control because of extreme, very aggressive responses to COVID. But I think there's a very, very compelling argument to be made that, we inherited a country that was in collapse, and America now is in really good shape, and largely through our work. So I think she was coached not to get pulled into defending the Biden administration. Yeah. And I also think once or twice she could have, and I don't blame her so much. I think she could have given out a shout out to Biden once or twice because Trump was spending so much time deriding him in the most disrespectful way. And I think just one or two things saying, Donald Trump, you couldn't carry, Joe Biden's golf clubs or something like that. Just some way to just to ridicule him and to just to bolster Biden. But again, I think she was disappointed not pulled into side alleys, which is what a lot of people, when you debate Trump, he can pull you down.
She stayed on course.
Yeah.
And the moderators try to keep them on course too, which I will applaud them for. But what I would like to see in another debate is I want to have moderators ready to fact check. I want to see charts and I want to see something on the screen that shows, and it's be like, this is what the fact, this is what it's saying, and it's not true what you're saying. How do you account for what you're saying? Because I think that's the only way to break through all of the noise that Trump spews.
But Emily, I think the other point too is, and it's hard to make this point delicately, but I'm sure, I know that many people who support Donald Trump are honorable people who want good things for this country, et cetera. But they allow him to get away with things that they should not let him should not allow him to get away with. They allow him to just live in a fact-free world and just make stuff up and don't hold him accountable. And, the other point, I guess, related to this is, and I've said this, in various conversations with people, Donald Trump is a really, really hard person to debate in the way that any of us who've been in high school, and when I'll be very direct, sort of the dumb, confident person is far harder to debate than the shrewd, smart, nuanced person, because just bluster and BS just comes flying at you, and you just don't know. It's hard to find a center of gravity to respond to. And Biden showed himself, almost painfully unable to find a center of gravity. Harris, I think, did a good job. She didn't get pulled down in trying to frantically, respond to everything, but just found, an area to respond and then go on the offense too. It wasn't her just playing defense.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it was interesting. I mean, she really tried to just find herself, right? I mean, and that's what all the media has been talking about. It's like, who is she? No one really knows, and what was interesting in talking about Biden, she really tried to distance herself from Biden. She really tried, and Trump really tried to bring her back in. And that was kind of, I think, the battle that was happening on stage, as you saw multiple times. He tried to bring her back into the Biden record. And the Biden record is relatively good comparatively to everything else. I mean, like where the economy's at, where crime's at. I mean, everything's lower. The fact that he's just spewing these lies and it's not being fact checked is a completely other different problem. But I mean, she was trying so hard to make a name for herself and really distance herself from him and the administration.
Right. That was a clear strategy. And again, it was a clear strategy that she executed successfully. I question the strategy a bit. I think you could, defend the record briefly and then pivot and say, this is a great foundation and let's build for the future. I mean, I think you can do that. And I don't know. I mean, the Democrats, are not going to, stop supporting her because of that. I mean, I think one of her core strategies is to reach out to this 10, 15, 20% of Republicans who are persuadable.
Absolutely.
And if it comes down to a few thousand votes in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, maybe by not getting into sort of partisan defense of Biden, but instead just, projecting a future focus and not maybe her strategy was that would allow her to win over some Republicans who are persuadable.
Yeah. What do you think of the moderators? I mean, listen, we can go on Trump all day. We're going to talk about some of his comments and responses, which were I was laughing out loud. But what I thought was really interesting, because I want to focus on Kamala, is the fact that the moderators did address that she has flip-flopped in her position over the past couple of years. How do you think she handled those responses? And do you think there's any validity to voters being concerned about her flip-floppiness, for lack of a better term?
I mean, I guess, politicians, I think she could have done a better job saying, you know what, I once had a perspective. Mm-hmm. I then became, a senator, and I've learned and I've grown and I've changed my mind. I mean, I think you can just acknowledge that my positions, and you can, whether the euphemism is evolved or changed or adjusted. I mean, clearly the strategy was to say, my values are the same. And then to just sort of, particularly the fracking issue, she really felt a really strong need to kind of sell her position on that. Clearly with Pennsylvania squarely in mind. So, I mean, I think she could have been a little bit more adroit at just saying, you know what? Same core values. My positions have changed over years on a few issues, largely because I've seen, circumstances have changed, the environment has changed. And so, I have made some adjustments, but still have my core values. So I think she did okay. And also the thing is, so she didn't do perfect there, but Trump's flip-flops are every bit as egregious, if not more, actually far more egregious, particularly on abortion. I mean, the way that he is so completely incoherent on that issue, from day to day.
That just hold the narrative. I just cannot. The narrative of post-birth abortion. Every time it comes out of his mouth, every time it comes out of a Republican's mouth, it's just mind boggling to me. It's crazy. And thankfully, Kamala Harris and the moderators were like, you know, what you're saying has absolutely no fact. And I was happy to see that pushback. But just the way that that has been allowed into dialogue is just mind boggling to me. Absolutely mind boggling. And it was interesting, and also tying this into Project 2025, so interesting seeing Donald Trump's response to it. I feel like Kamala Harris's position changed from what she had thought she should be doing at the beginning to what she did at the end, which was tie him to Project 2025. And she did that a bit at the beginning. And then I think she saw that he just was going to be distancing himself as much as possible from it, and that it was no use trying to tie him to it. And I feel like that might have been kind of going against what she'd originally been coached, especially when it comes to abortion issues. What are your thoughts?
My thought is on Project 2025. I mean, most Americans don't really know what it is, other than the kind of the perception that it's this, kind of extreme right wing agenda that would kind of repeal the 20th and 21st centuries, and so. I think it made sense not to get into too deep of a recitation on the issues of it. I mean, I think she just basically said, he's a proponent of a kind of backward looking failed policies, and then was very specific, on abortion in particular. So I think she scored the points that she needed to score on the essence of 2025 without getting into this big debate, because I don't think, in middle America, most people, I mean, they've sort of heard of it, but it's not something that really arouses strong passions. It's just a broad concept. Maybe some of the specific issues do, but just the broad concept of 2025 is not as, sort of foreboding as many in the political class seem to think.
Donald Trump did not have a good response at all when asked about abortion. And I think that's very important for people to recognize, as they blatantly asked him, will you veto if abortion like a full-term ban on abortion if it comes to your desk? And he just did not respond. I hope people very much listen to that.
And also, I mean, his response that everyone supports making this a state's issue was so palpably misleading and false.
That's true.
Yeah, no one that's in no way does that represent the consensus view. I mean, I'm sure some believe that, but it in no way says everyone supports that, Democrats and Republicans. Again, this is where Trump, I think that the bar for just permissible dialogue has been just lowered so much for him that he's kind of allowed to say just stunningly outrageous things. And it's considered, well, that's just Trump being Trump, as opposed to this is a nutty person who should not be near the White House.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about those two things. One which the moderators pushed back on and one which the moderators did not. And I'm sure you're knowing what I'm talking about. One is talking about the rumor that has absolutely no fact behind it that Haitian immigrants are eating pets in Ohio. Okay? I mean, the fact that which JD also, kind of a sidebar, but acknowledge that when talking about abortion that he has not talked to JD Vance about it, which is your running mate, which is a person that you're supposed to have a good relationship with. A stunning admission. Crazy. Okay? Which I think people are just going to bypass with all the other crazy stuff he said. But I mean, that's a huge admission.
Yeah.
Okay. But the fact that JD Vance has said today that the rumors surrounding the Haitian immigrants in Ohio eating pets is probably false, which it is. There's no proof behind it, but still it's important to talk about and for people to share those memes. I mean, and luckily the moderators push back and they're like, okay, we talked to the mayor of this town. This is not true. There is no fact behind it. But the fact that he felt comfortable on a debate stage, on a national stage to make that claim, I think just completely speaks to your concerns regarding the person that could be behind the nuclear codes. It's crazy. It's wild to me.
Yeah, and I mean, if someone came from Mars and heard just this little segment, they like, what is this human being even talking about? It's almost like a parody of a nutty politician. It was just so
SNL cannot write it. Truly.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's crazy. And then, of course, there's the other statement that moderators did not push back on, which I don't want to misquote, but even if I did, I don't think it could be as crazy what was actually said, which was Kamala Harris supports transitional surgery for illegal aliens in prison. Which, just tell me, they gave him a list of buzzwords and that was just all he could think of, right? I mean, what? Crazy.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and I'm thinking of, my friends who, worked in factories and just kind of sitting there listening and saying, what is he even talking about? It feels such a peripheral, stupid thing that is not central to anyone's lives or, yeah, I mean, it just, again, you're sitting there saying, and I have some European friends who are watching this election very, very carefully. And they, I'm sure you have this experience too when you talk to people from other countries. They are beyond incredulous that Donald Trump could even be on the ballot. They're saying, I mean, how do you have, someone who's been impeached twice, led an insurrection, indicted, X number of times, convicted on 34, obviously unstable, treats people horribly, horrific, human being in terms of how he treats people in real life. I mean, how is someone like that even politically viable in a serious country? And so as I was watching this, I know they were probably some of them were staying up all night watching it, but certainly they'll watch it in the morning. And, I think Trump's performance terrifies. And the fact that he's still, we should maybe talk about this. It's still a very, very close election.
Yeah, no,
and even though, Harris, I think helped herself a lot.
Isn't enough.
It's going to be really, really close and maybe comes down to 5,000 voters in Pennsylvania and 10,000 in Wisconsin and, 3,000 in Michigan. So it's still going to be a really, really close election, even with someone as, to put it mildly, flawed as Donald Trump.
Yeah. I mean, and I think another point too, that I think it's kind of be lost among all the other big things that happened was they were talking about January 6th and they were talking about whether or not he would do a peaceful transition to power. Right. And they get listed off a couple of quotes and the moderators, especially David Muir, was like, it appears in the past recently that you have come to the agreement and have stated that you believe that you lost the election. And he mentioned a couple of quotes of Trump. Trump almost whispered, said, did I say that? And I just don't, if you had the argument that President Biden was not coherent enough and was not aware enough to be president and to run. And if you just allow that comment to go without the necessary scrutiny that I think it deserves, then there's nothing more than you were saying that you were a hypocrite. Okay. Yeah. And I think that is something that I hope the mainstream media has picked up on and is discussing, because I think it is such an important question. If you're a person that is running for the highest office and you are not even entirely sure what you said and on what tone you said it, then I think that's a problem that needs to be
then when you're kind of caught, well, I was just being sarcastic, it was such a lame. And I think also, and here I think the moderators could have pinned him down more, is when he's trying to give his response to January 6th and immediately pivoted to, Minneapolis and Seattle and so forth. I mean, completely unrelated to an armed insurrection to stop Congress from counting the votes. I mean, those were specific circumstances that certainly deserve study and scrutiny and debate. But to pivot, I mean, if that's the best defense you can give for January 6th is what the other person did, in terms of, Minnesota, at a different period of time, it's pretty pathetic.
Yeah, no, it was not great. Not great at all. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of what else? There's a couple of things I want to touch on, but before I do, what else really spoke out to you into this debate? What else really?
Well, I mean, the one that was in a certain sense jaw-dropping is they said do you want Ukraine to win? And he was not able to say yes. He says, I want this war to be over. I mean, he went out of his way to say, I am not all in on Ukraine resisting and defeating armed aggression from Russia. I mean, that is, in any other context in American history, that comment alone would have been, that evasion alone would be disqualifying, And it was just shocking. I thought it was also the Afghanistan piece. I mean, Harris, I thought, did a good job in kind of a debater's sense of, rather than defending the withdrawal, which was not executed well. I think we can agree with that. I mean, to just say, but actually what we're doing is effectively implementing a policy that Trump, negotiated, and just played off this whole thing. Our master negotiator basically gave away the store to the Taliban and was ready to invite them to Camp David and hang out and enjoy themselves. So I think that was one case where she might have been, I think she deflected, which, I think there is a legitimate question about whether the withdrawal was executed smoothly and effectively.
I would probably not use the adjective smooth.
Right. I think that's a pretty apt thing. So, I think, foreign policy too, I think Harris had a pretty solid answer on Israel, Gaza. Clearly they're trying to, Trump was, and then Trump is things, if Harris is elected, Israel will be gone in 2 years or 4 years, whatever it was. I mean, literally, I'm sure Bibi Netanyahu, sitting at home in Tel Aviv watching this is saying, and
like clapping.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What I thought was really interesting that a topic the moderators omitted was veteran affairs. I feel like they talked about unions a bit, which I think is important. They talked about climate change and how that affects multiple different generations. But the fact that veteran affairs were not addressed, I think was a huge, huge miss on the moderator's part to not ask a question regarding that.
I agree. But I would also say, Emily, on climate change, as I remember, it was like, okay, we have a minute. Tell me what you think about climate change, which is, this existential crisis that threatens, the next, succeeding generations, and to say, okay, let's, 30 seconds talk about climate change. I mean, it seemed to me that should have gotten, a fuller discussion. And another topic I was a reporter in DC for many years, the whole notion of deficits and debt. I mean, we are $35 trillion in the hole. And it's at least worth asking both candidates, so what would you do? How serious is the problem and what would you do to confront it? Mm-hmm. And they, there was a little bit of a tangential discussion about each person's economic plan and tax cut plan and so forth. But that's one question I thought that deserved a much fuller discussion. Well, it had no discussion. So I think it really deserved a deeper dive for sure.
I agree. I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, obviously the data shows that debates really do not do much in moving public opinion. Do you think that's the case with this debate?
It was not going to shift the numbers dramatically. I think it gave Democrats energy and conviction that Harris can win and should win and must win. And I think it opened the door for some Republicans to say, okay, this is one time where I just can't take the party line. I'm going to vote for Harris once. I won't vote for her again. So in terms of broad shift of public opinion, probably not. But in possibly affecting, 10, 20, 30,000 votes in swing states, possibly. I mean, this could have been, an important moment. I mean, one thing that's interesting, and I wonder what your thoughts are. I did some commentary today where I was asked several times whether I thought there'd be a second debate between Trump and Harris. And my view was, if Harris acquitted herself reasonably well, why do it again? What are you going to gain by a second debate with Trump? He's shown his colors about as clearly as he can. You're not going to, I suppose there's a possibility of a total meltdown, but, I don't think our public discourse necessarily needs another debate between the two of these. I don't think it's particularly tactically smart for Harris. I think she did what she needed to do. I think she showed for everyone who's at least an honest assessor that she can be president of the United States. And now I think she just needs to sprint to the finish line and don't even, maybe you have to play the rhetorical game about whether you would take another debate or not. But I don't think so. I mean, what is your take on that?
On a high note.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I think what I think she ended was towards the second half of the debate, she really spoke about unity, which is like not even a phrase that Trump uttered once.
Yeah.
And that was her speaking to those moderates, right? Who are maybe kind of unsure or feel like, well, we didn't really vote for her. So why should she get our vote? You know? And I think her really focusing on unity and being nice, you know, I think that was her really playing into it. And I agree. I don't know what another debate would do besides just continue the same, you know,
food fights.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
The same bullshit that happens every time.
But let me ask you this, Emily. What is your take on how this debate might affect the gender disparity? I mean, do you think it, because, Harris is leading women by 20 points and Trump is leading men by 15 points. I mean, do you think this does anything to alter that? Or do you think those numbers are pretty well locked in and this doesn't really affect that?
I don't know. I think she handled herself with like the utmost grace and did not bring any, which I'm really happy to see, which I think they really screwed up with Hillary Clinton's campaign, is they really made a focal point about her being a woman. I think Kamala Harris's campaign, they're not focusing on that. They're focusing on her being Black and South Asian. And I think that is a very big difference that I'm hoping will beat past the ever-present misogyny in our country. But I don't know. I think she handles herself really well. From a point of trying to get over more men, I was glad that she admitted that she was a gun owner, regardless of my personal opinions on that. Yeah. I think that was a very good, important move on her part. But I have no idea. But I do think potentially men in a misogynistic tone could say that she was too soft and too nice and just focused on all of us getting along and wasn't strong enough. I do wish when Trump was telling her to stop speaking that she spoke up to him a little bit more. Yeah. That probably might have, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because she did it and she's said that she's bossy and a bitch, or she does it and she's strong and empowered, there's no winning.
I think she could have brandished her. I'm a prosecutor, as a former prosecutor, and she did a little bit on the trafficking issue and immigration. I think she kind of she played defense a little bit by saying, I'm the only one on the stage who's actually prosecuted people for transnational crimes. I think she could have played her law and order credentials a little bit stronger than she did. Not a huge miss. I mean, I think the point was made, but I think she could have, in maybe a response or two, kind of tightened that up and been a little bit more forceful. But again, I don't want to overstate it. I don't think that was a significant. I don't think that would have significantly changed the dynamic, but it might have been a nice little bow to put on top of the debate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're talking to anyone who isn't decided, right?
Yeah.
People are very set in their ways. There's a very small few that feel a little bit differently. I think maybe for the men that are not completely decided, it could have helped push the needle a little bit towards her way, but I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference in gender.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it was very good for the Democrats to have her out as the candidate. I will say that. And I think being able to put her against Trump rather putting Biden against Trump, it really allowed Trump and in all his glory to shine.
Yeah. Emily, just a quick point. I was in D.C. in this spring, and I was talking to some Democratic political consultants, and this was right before the Biden-Trump debate. Mm-hmm. And I don't purport to be the expert, but I said, I don't understand what Biden gets from a Trump debate. I said, Trump is a really, really hard person to debate, and you got to be quick on your feet, and you got to be able, mentally alert to know what, where to attack and when to pull back. And, I had not seen Biden up close, certainly like the debate showed, but I just didn't think, it was not clear to me that Biden could ever, what he would gain by having a debate with Trump. And clearly, I'm sure there were smart people in the Biden camp looked at the trajectory of the race and thought that they needed to do something, that they thought, they were on a path for not winning. And so a debate was a risk they had to take. Obviously, it turned out to be a disastrous risk. But I have to think anyone who is watching Biden, even somewhat carefully, would have known that a debate with Trump just was not going to work this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was good to see Harris up there. I think it's the best trajectory for the country at the moment, and hopefully getting a Democrat in office. But what a wild first debate. And regardless of all the way we've been nitpicking it, I do believe that it was ultimately very beneficial for the Harris campaign. And not sure so much about Trump campaign. I think maybe it knocked it a few points down, right? But, people who are Trump supporters are very set in their ways, and there's not much that's going to change that.
And a quick thing, I was watching just MSNBC for a couple of minutes after the debate before we started, and the one point they made, and I didn't disagree with it, but I didn't notice it as much as they did. They thought that just Trump seemed noticeably deflated, almost bewildered, beleaguered. I'm not so sure. Trump is who he is. There's never a coherent response, and he was angry and shouted. They just saw that the kind of the physical affect between the two was very striking. And they said, had you watched the debate with the volume off, you would have seen Harris as a decisive winner in terms of body language and just comportment. What's your take on that?
No, I don't know. He definitely was angry. I don't know if I would say bewildered. I will say, and I don't know how much to read into this because, sometimes your face doesn't necessarily give away to what you're actually thinking. But there's a couple things where he would nod his head or he would shake his head. And you're like, was that an admission of something? And I don't know how fair it is to read into that because, I think he was angry more than bewildered. I think it takes a lot to bewilder Trump. I don't really think it's an emotion that he knows or has because he's so confident in his beliefs and who he is.
That's a great way of putting it, because bewildered suggests a kind of a degree of reflection and introspection that just Trump does not have.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that's happening.
It's sort of like he's just kind of waiting to hit back as opposed to sort of processing, what should be said or what, the validity of a point that's made. He's clearly just readying himself to launch the next haymaker.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, John, any other comments or statements you want to talk about?
Hey, Emily, I was just going to say, kind of to show just how this election and this debate is playing out, in about 1 hour, I'm going to go live on a TV station in India that wants that wants to take on this election. And it's just, it just shows kind of the global impact.
I cannot imagine looking at this from an outside perspective. Even as an American who follows this, it's impossible. It's nearly impossible to put my heads on straight.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you. I'm glad I got you. Lovely to have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. This is a lot of fun, and I wish you well and would love to keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.